Now let's talk a little bit about evolution and human behavior, including the mind. For quite a long time, people were interested in understanding how much of our sort of natural tendencies and our natural characteristics were caused by nature, that is, our genetic contributions, and how much were caused by nurture, that is, our environmental and learning conditions. And this debate's gone on for quite a long time, and they were considered to be kind of separate and opposing influences. But now I think we recognize that both of those things play tremendous roles in both mind and behavior, and more importantly, genes tend to respond to experience. And gene based behaviors also shape the environment. So we'll learn a little bit about how these things interact to create human behavior. So here's a simple example of it. For example, here we have genes, of course, and these things, of course, contribute to a person's ability, for example, physical ability to dance, and so forth. Basically, having the musculature and so forth that's necessary for things like dancing, like this person is doing here. But similarly, you don't become a decent dancer without an awful lot of practice, and of course, that's the nurture component. To assume that you could achieve what this person is achieving, for example, here, without either some, and both actually, some gifts of inheritance, but also some gifts of environment and practice, they just don't happen. So those things clearly go together, and we'll talk a little bit about how. So the notion here is, with nature and nurture, that nature provides building blocks, but nurture generally determines which of these blocks will be used and how they'll be combined. So, for example, every cell in the human body carries a full set of DNA needed to provide a blueprint for a person. In healthy people, every cell in the body carries a full set of DNA needed to provide kind of this blueprint for a person. So humans have 46 strands of this DNA, or chromosomes, that spend most of the time in pairs, as shown here. And then the individual genes are just sections along these strands, just components of the strands. So an individual's genotype, we should probably talk about the difference between a genotype and a phenotype. An individual's genotype is his or her actual set of DNA, that is, their genes. The phenotype, on the other hand, consists of his or her observable characteristics, things like being a good dancer. So while the phenotype, being a good dancer, is influenced by the genotype, that is, having certain genes that enable things like strength and maneuverability and pliability and all those kinds of things, lots of environmental influences help determine how those genes get expressed. So genes must be expressed to influence observable characteristics. So although every cell in your body contains your full genome, most genes in any cell are inactive most of the time, and I don't think people recognize that. So in order for certain genes in your cell, even though they exist, to actually be active, certain environmental conditions need to be made. So you can see that the environmental conditions, basically nurture, actually influence which genes get expressed, the nature. In gene expression, one of the chromosomes unfolds, and this stretches out one or more of the genes, and then that gene is used as a recipe for creating proteins. That's really what genes do. Genes create proteins, and that protein itself, rather than the gene, influences the behavior or the phenotype. So you can see here, even in this model of hemoglobin, which is a pretty important one for human beings, this model of human hemoglobin protein, which allows red blood cells to pick up oxygen and transport it around the body, that without that strong hemoglobin gene expression, this woman wouldn't be able to keep doing what she's doing in terms of physical exertion required in dance. So in this case, her genes create this protein. This protein at least creates a situation in which she can achieve things like this dance. But that doesn't happen without actual practice and kind of an environment in which dancing is made possible.